My name is Sydney Levin-Epstein. I am running for state senate in the new Hampden, Hampshire and Worcester State Senate District, a seat that was previously held by Eric Lesser, now running for lieutenant governor. Senate because I want to create communities where people who want to stay can stay. That means spurring economic growth and opportunity to give the next generation of people the option to stay here and to make sure that our seniors have housing in order to afford to stay here. I previously served in the 114th, 115th, and 116th congressional sessions, first under Congressman Neal's leadership and then in Senator Ed Markey's office, where I focused on issues of economic development, transportation, and military and veterans affairs. Utilizing my federal and state legislative experience is what makes me the strongest candidate for this position to represent the 413. I'm a proud product of Western Massachusetts. My dad's from Holyoke, my mom works in Springfield, I went to high school in South Hadley, I live in Longmeadow now, our family business was in Hadley. Everyone at the Thanksgiving table has a 413 phone number, and understanding what it means to be from a forgotten community, having the federal experience in order to amplify our needs, positions me well for success in the state senate. We need to build communities that give people the option to stay. So what does that mean? My generation and yours are probably seeing many of our peers leaving, right? They're going to Boston or New York or to other cities to find jobs. And when they live in those cities, they're spending a paycheck a month on rent, making the idea of home ownership entirely unfeasible. We have to do more in order to give our college graduates the option to stay. A couple of months ago, I spoke at UMass before graduation, and I asked students who are getting ready for the next chapter of their lives how many of them plan to stay in Western Mass when they graduate. One student said yes, and they are staying in Western Mass due to an ailing parent. We are losing thousands of people who could contribute to a job market because we don't have a better form of employment in Western Massachusetts to give them the option to stay. By expanding the biotechnology field and sector, championing life science development here in Western Mass, we're creating a better form of employment that gives people living wages and health insurance so they can become homeowners, so they can deepen their roots in the community that raised them. Granby doesn't just have a right to feel forgotten. Communities like Granby have been forgotten by Beacon Hill insiders. Boston regularly treats us like we are Narnia, this mystical, magical land where whatever happens west of 495 isn't a problem of the greater Boston area. My campaign has been impossible to ignore. Rarely have we ever seen Carole King, the Grammy Award winner, the professional firefighters of Massachusetts, and reproductive rights champions from across the country support a state Senate candidate in Western Mass. I'm rewriting the playbook of how a Democrat can win in a community that has not only been forgotten, but doesn't politically identify so often with national rhetoric. My campaign is one that is rooted in reality, driven by the values and purpose of fighting for Western Massachusetts. Because I've been doing this work in the United States Congress and the United States Senate, I am positioned well to continue to champion economic development, military and veterans affairs, and transportation accessibility in the state Senate on behalf of Western Mass. I have an unwavering commitment to this community because I have the audacity to believe in it. So often when we feel forgotten, we throw our hands up, right? Like, my voice doesn't matter. I haven't been heard. What does any of this mean? I'm here to change the face of leadership. What does it mean to empower and uplift not just the next generation of political leaders in Western Mass, but also women in this community who have historically been forgotten and not given seats at the table? I'm working and running a campaign to change the game. The hill I will die on is building a train that connects Springfield to Boston with a stop in Palmer. We need to expand transportation to finally connect our Commonwealth. The ability to give opportunities for employment, for medical services is of dire consequence. Because right now in Western Mass, it's becoming nearly impossible to afford a home, right? I'm struggling with that now, making that a reality. Many people of our generation are. And I've also had personal experiences where maybe seeing a specialist or a special care provider in the medical field, the only option was to go to Boston. Right now, with our opioid epidemic that is raging across Western Mass, we don't have enough beds here. There are so many reasons why we need to expand transportation to Boston, and we have to build that rail line. Because of Senator Eric Lesser's leadership and Congressman Neal's federal work, we have been able to see what was once a pipe dream become a reality. I worked on Eric Lesser's first campaign. I remember knocking doors for him and people laughing at the idea that a train would ever be built, right? Because it's this idea that we've been forgotten. Why would we get a train? What he has been able to do is historic, creating landmark legislation to expand transportation access. I want to take that torch and run with it. We have to build West-East Rail in order to save the future of our economy, to provide opportunities for the next generation of people who want to stay here, and just make life a bit easier. I mean, don't you, how, in a couple of years, maybe you and I can go grab lunch in the seaport and then still come back and home in time for dinner. That's a reality. And The amount of cars we're taking off the mass pike, slashing greenhouse gas emissions. At the very least, to get people to wake up, our climate crisis has a chokehold on our next generation. If we don't expand rail access, we are exacerbating the harm that we are doing to our climate. And we need to continue to build trains in order to get fewer cars on the road. I'm deeply concerned about the rise of gun violence in our country and the ways in which rhetoric has changed about this. A good example is I was recently reading an entire essay about how teachers need to be more responsible for locking their doors while teaching classes because of the risk of a shooting. As far as I'm concerned, that's a form of victim blaming. Putting the responsibility on our teachers to lock the door or change if it's an outward or an inward facing door is incredibly harmful to the ways in which we take very serious and tangible steps with the power of the legislature to combat the gun violence epidemic. We must stand we as in legislators, must stand in solidarity with groups like Moms Demand Moms Demand Action Against Gun Violence in order to have staunch efforts of community and coalition building to address the epidemic that's taking place across this country and in our own backyard. Our state legislature has the historic opportunity to make bold changes. Right now, there are so many different ways that the power of the legislature can improve our lives, because at the end of the day, policy is personal. Tax code is intended to be overcomplicated as a means to misguide or disengage voters, which causes a civic disengagement. When you just think that all of the policies and what we hear about in terms of surplus and funding is confusing, right? Because at the end of the day, you hear X amount of billions of dollars was allocated to this project, or hundreds of thousands was granted to this nonprofit. And headlines, it can almost seem like just monopoly money, the way that it's thrown around. That's why our next state senator must have both the federal and state legislative experience to allocate this money. I have been responsible for helping to negotiate different budget amendments that go into major pieces of legislation that impact our lives. We have to take bold investment into strengthening our economy here in Western Massachusetts. The historic surplus that you're referring to is giving us this opportunity to expand the type of development and support that we see. I'm thinking about our schools, the resource officers that we need to hire, the relief that can be provided to our first responders and our teachers who are suffering from burnout in the post-pandemic era. We have to do more to help rebuild our nation after, I hate to even say unprecedented times, because it's one of those phrases we keep continuously hearing, but we have all just survived a global traumatic episode that requires allocating these funds to reestablish and rebuild. One of the ways that I would use this funding almost immediately is for state-funded cancer screenings for all first responders. Our firefighters are exposed to deadly cancerous chemicals on a daily basis through the foam that helps get rid of fires, but also their protective gear that seeps into their skin through direct contact. Firefighters have faced two problems when accessing cancer screenings. First is qualifications in their health insurance. The age a firefighter needs to have a cancer screening is often too young and isn't included in their health insurance plan to receive coverage. The next is funding. The State House has not allocated enough funding to provide cancer screenings to our firefighters, even though we have the surplus available to do so. The first piece of legislation I intend to introduce next session is to provide state-funded cancer screenings for our firefighters, because it is reprehensible that we dare to expect the brave men and women of our firehouses to come to our rescue, yet the powers that be can't do the bare minimum to ensure we aren't protecting them, giving them just the access to see if they're okay, right? Because that's what a cancer screening is. It's just saying, hey, am I good today? And making sure that's as accessible and affordable as humanly possible. It's just one of the ways I intend to help address systemic flaws, creating systemic changes that improve our quality of life to make sure no one ever remains forgotten, and especially in Western Mass. Being led by community is a critical component to the success of my campaign. My dad is a substitute teacher in Longmeadow Public Schools, and many of my dear friends are also educators throughout this district. I'm deeply concerned about the issues that they face, not just as teachers, but on a daily, practical level. I recently attended a school committee meeting in my community where teachers were giving testimonials about some of the obstacles that they face. One story that really sticks with me is from a second grade teacher describing some of the developmental delays that they're experiencing through their new class. And what's a skill that you learn in kindergarten that you might take for granted? Well, I had never been asked this question because you just learn skills in kindergarten and then you move on. It's learning how to hand scissors, right? How, if you give me a pair of scissors and I need to hand it to someone next to me, there's a way to do that that's safe where no one gets hurt. It's a skill nearly impossible to teach over Zoom to a student who's by themselves. In this second grade classroom, a student accidentally had stabbed another student because they never learned how to pass scissors in kindergarten when they were taking classes virtually. It's those types of issues, ones that are often overlooked because of the systemic flaws that we need to immediately address, and looking also at the emotional and mental health crises that are taking place at every level of our educational system, making sure that teachers play an integral part of the conversation, that they have a seat at the table, and working with them to help create curriculums that make the most sense in their classrooms, that support parents and the challenges that they're facing at home, while taking a primary look at our students from pre-K to 12. What can we do? And using every stakeholder to create legislation that matches the need, meeting people where they're at in order to do so. The politicization of the highest court in the land is our greatest threat to democracy. The acts of war that a right-wing majority Supreme Court has taken on our fundamental rights threatens the fragility of democracy. It threatens the will of the people to represent their power in a ballot box. It threatens our ability to breathe clean air. It threatens my ability to have autonomy over my own body. As a young woman using her voice in her campaign to make a defiance on the political trends of our nation is something I take incredibly seriously. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, a fundamental right was stripped from women across the country. While we might be safe in Massachusetts because we have the Roe Act, we have serious systemic flaws that are preventing people from accessing equitable abortion care. In Western Massachusetts alone, we have clinic deserts, which means you might have to drive miles, if not hours, out of your way to access a women's health care center to provide basic information on reproductive sexual health, even to receive a mammogram at times. We also have an issue of fake pregnancy care centers in Western Massachusetts. These are pregnancy care centers that masquerade as women's health clinics, but they don't even meet HIPAA regulations or the other medical board standards of providing care because they hide under an umbrella of religious outreach, a form of giving people information as a nonprofit that prevents them from being sued of deceptive advertising. As the next state senator from Western Massachusetts, I intend on introducing legislation that will financially penalize any of these fake clinics who are providing deceptive and misguided information to women who are seeking reproductive care. Because what they do is they emotionally manipulate someone into not being able to receive the right to care that they choose to have. In Massachusetts, it is illegal to deceive anyone on what kosher food is. It's illegal to provide deceptive information on a live performance of a concert venue. You buy a ticket to a circus and you get a rock band, that's not legal. That's heavily regulated. You buy kosher Hebrew National hot dogs and you end up receiving a pork sausage, illegal. So if you go to an abortion care clinic and spend money to receive an abortion, and then you are you're deceived and misguided out of not doing that, but that's legal because it's under the false cloak of religious outreach, well, that's ridiculous. And without bold leadership addressing some of the critical ways in which our democracy has been threatened, we're not going to see a resolution to this problem. It isn't true that we get to sit pretty in Massachusetts thinking we're safe here because it's a blue state and that things have worked in our favor. We have to take bold action to protect the future of democracy. One of the ways I intend to do that is by the reproductive plans I've put forward in my campaign. It's by combating climate change to protect our environment, supporting our local farmers, making sure that monopolies don't have a chokehold on their ability to contribute their produce to our local economy, strengthening those relationships, making sure everyone has access to the ballot box, that no vote is ever oppressed. These are fundamental values that must be cherished, they must be championed, and I am ready to do that as our next state senator from Western Mass. Providing equitable access to any public forum is a critical component of a functioning democracy. You need to know what's going on in your community in order to understand where power lies and how to have the opportunity to actively engage and to participate. When we have closed door meetings, it's preventing opportunity to access what's going on that impacts your life. To mandate hybrid meetings means that we need to make sure that the municipal leaders have a seat at the table to see what works best for each community. Do they have the funding available to create a Zoom setup? What are the ways in which we can expand broadband access? One of the issues that I've found in this Senate district is that there are municipalities that would like a hybrid format but are having a very difficult time making sure the internet connection is working during those meetings. Spending a significant portion of a meeting dealing with someone muting or unmuting or not even having access to a camera versus making sure that they're staying on task and doing what they need to do in their roles. Part of adapting to the new world that we live in, which it is. This is an adaptation. This is what we were discussing hybrid models 3 years ago, is making sure that we are evolving with flexibility. What makes sense for each community? How can I help to support and amplify their needs, as well as to secure our fair share of funding to make this, to alleviate the costs on towns and cities across Western Mass, to increase the accessible opportunity to engage civically. I'm looking forward to serving as our next state senator, because I have built a strong campaign, one that's been impossible to ignore. But my values have always been what drives me, not political convenience or politicking in general. I think we do live in this world where we expect our elected officials to be almost caricatures of a politician, right? They look a certain way, they act a certain way. It's this white picket fence lifestyle, which is completely unrealistic and unattainable in the 21st century, because most of us, I mean, have you seen the cost of a fence lately? Like, let alone a white picket fence. It's so expensive. And I say this because I'm really driving my life on purpose. There are two forms of purpose that we live by. I like to call it the bigger P and the little p. So a little p in purpose is something of like, it's an action, it's a project. What can you do to do something? So a really great example of this was when gay marriage was first legalized in the United States, when same-sex marriage passed. That was counting as something of like, okay, here is something we can take on. Here's an actionable item. That's a little p. The big P was fighting for equality and the way those activists risked their lives for generations in order to accomplish that. For me, my big P is fighting for the community that raised me. And those little P's, those purpose of that other purpose of how we get there. What can I accomplish in order to make sure that my big P is always intact, which is fighting on behalf of those who have been unheard. Giving voice to a forgotten community is something that I take seriously and I take personally. And I will do that in every avenue, in every chapter of my life. I plan on continuously fighting for reproductive justice across this country, especially in states where it has already been banned. I plan on combating climate change for the rest of my life as a critical component of survival and giving people the option to stay, the option to grow, and the option to live a healthy lifestyle. I believe that when we live with purpose, understanding what drives us is really how we should consider who we vote for in the ballot box. Is this a person who I can trust? Is this a person who has dignity and integrity, who is seeing a much bigger picture here? One of the ways I intend to fight for our community in Western Mass, to give voices to those whose rights are being stripped away, is by serving proudly as our next state senator. And I'll never stop fighting for those who continue to be forgotten. And I really believe that we have an opportunity right now with this seat to change the game, to shine a light on Western Mass we haven't seen before, to give voice to young women and girls across the 413 who haven't had the opportunity to be in leadership. And if I can change the precedent, if I can help create a new path to bring more people like me and like you to the table, then mission accomplished. Well, I really appreciate your time today and hearing me out, as well as providing me the opportunity to be heard. I believe in all forms of public access television and the way that we can communicate, and I am, again, just so grateful for the opportunity. So thank you for your questions, and if you're watching, thank you. I hope to earn your vote. Well, I do hope to earn your vote in this state Senate race, both in the primary and in the general election. I am running because I want to create communities where people have the option to stay. We've seen our population drastically decline. Our economic growth continues to dwindle, especially in the post-pandemic era. And by helping to change the game, we're going to see opportunity foster. By building West East Rail to spur economic growth, by bringing better jobs to Western Massachusetts and helping to combat the opioid epidemic, we will be able to redefine what it means to be a proud Western Mass resident and giving the next generation the option to thrive, not just live, but to thrive in the 413.